4:18 a.m. Gulf of Oman. 3 small boats just peeled away from the Iranian coastline, running dark, no navigation lights, closing at 38 knots, and 6 American sailors were already in the water, alone, in a rubber boat, 2 miles from their ship, with no idea any of this was coming. In 2016, they surrounded and detained 10 U.S. Navy sailors. In 2019, they seized a British-flagged tanker. In 2021, they boarded a vessel in international waters. Each time, a test. Each time, a read on how far they could push. But in the Gulf of Oman, on night 6 of the American blockade, the IRGC Navy ran a more sophisticated operation than any of those. They didn't just harass. They set a trap, and almost nobody on that destroyer saw it coming. The USS Bainbridge had been on the southern arc of the blockade for 6 days. Her mission: stop vessels heading to and from Iranian ports. Inspect, document, redirect, disable if necessary. For 5 of those days, it had been dull. Word had spread. Tankers turned around before they even got close. The blockade ran on reputation. Night 6 changed that. 3:42 a.m. The Bainbridge's SBY-1D radar picks up a slow contact, 13 nautical miles southwest, tanker-sized, 7 knots. AIS transponder off. No identification signal. Suspicious, but not rare. The bridge classifies it as a suspect contact and launches a boarding team. 6 sailors in a rigid inflatable boat, 22 knots south, standard protocol. They'd done this over 200 times. 4:18 a.m. The MH-60R Seahawk helicopter, orbiting at 1,500 feet, swings its thermal camera north, out of habit. And 3 heat signatures appear that have no business being there. 3 boats, fiberglass hulls, spacing disciplined, wakes identical, running 38 knots away from the Iranian coast. The sensor operator reads the engine returns and recognizes the pattern immediately. PIAP-3 fast attack craft. Built by Iran, designed for this. 12 men. RPGs uncovered. Rocket pods cleared for fire. And wake patterns that tell the operator these boats have been sitting in the radar shadow of the Iranian coast, throttled down, waiting, for hours. They hadn't spotted an opportunity. They'd been waiting for the boarding team to launch. The tanker wasn't running the blockade. The tanker was bait. They hadn't spotted an opportunity. They'd been waiting for the boarding team to launch. Now, before I show you what the U.S. captain did next, you need to understand one thing about the geometry of this problem. Because the IRGC didn't just set a trap, they set a trap that made the obvious response potentially fatal for the American sailors already in the water. The Bainbridge ordered the boarding team home the moment the threat picture came through. The coxswain didn't wait for an explanation. Hard turn, throttles to the stops, 32 knots back to the ship. But the PIAP-3s were already executing their swarm pattern. What had looked like a column split into 3 attack vectors. The lead boat straight at the Bainbridge from the north, 1 boat peeling east, 1 peeling southwest. Attack from 3 bearings simultaneously. Force the ship to split its fire. It's a sound doctrine against a vessel that can only point so many weapons in so many directions. The problem was bearing 215. The southwestern PIAP-3 was closing on the exact same compass line as the returning RHIB, with the 6-man rubber boat between it and the ship. The captain's portside Mark 38 chain gun had a clean shot at the Iranian boat. But firing a 25mm round at flat trajectory toward a target directly behind his own men at 3,600 feet per second was not an option. The 5-inch gun on the foredeck couldn't depress low enough at this range. These ships were built to fight at 60 miles. The PIAP-3s had run into the one engagement envelope where $1 billion of Aegis technology was less useful than a hunting rifle. The captain made the call. The starboard Mark 38 opened on the eastern PIAP-3 at 1,500 yards. At 200 rounds per minute, at that range, you don't aim, you point. The burst stitched the eastern boat from bow to transom. Then, a 25mm round hit the 107mm rocket pod amidships. The rockets cooked off in series. One of them caught the lead boat broadside. The Seahawk crew described what followed as a complete energetic disassembly. The thermal display whited out. Both boats were gone. The Western Piap 3, the one on bearing 215, was now alone. She'd been counting on 3 simultaneous threats. Instead, her sisters were on the bottom of the Gulf of Oman in under 90 seconds. By the time the RHIB cleared bearing 215, the port Mark 38 had a clean fire control solution on the last Iranian boat. The gunner's thumb went to the trigger. He didn't need to use it. Weapons went overboard. Hands went up. The Western Piap 3 throttled to a crawl. 4 IRGC sailors captured. 8 were not coming home. If you're finding this useful, this kind of tactical breakdown, not just headlines, hit subscribe. We do exactly this every week. Back to it. Here's what most coverage missed. This wasn't recklessness. It was a calibrated test. The IRGC spent 6 days watching the Bainbridge's patterns before they moved. They chose the exact moment of maximum vulnerability, boarding team in the water, ship focus south, to launch a 3-vector swarm that their own doctrine says should overwhelm a destroyer-class vessel. The question is why now? The blockade represents a direct threat to Iranian revenue flows. The IRGC has domestic pressure to respond visibly. A successful asymmetric strike against a U.S. warship, even just forcing it to disengage, is an enormous propaganda victory that costs relatively little. What they didn't account for was a Seahawk sensor operator with good habits and a captain who could solve a geometry problem under fire in under 4 minutes. The deterrence question is harder. The engagement ended with 4 prisoners, 2 Piap 3s on the bottom, and the tanker disabled anyway. By any measure, the IRGC lost this round decisively, but the doctrine that produced this attack is still in place. The next crew will study this engagement and look for the angle that worked. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Every day, roughly 21 million barrels of oil pass through it, about 20% of global supply. Every time there's a confrontation in these waters, insurance rates move, tanker operators recalculate routes, and energy markets twitch. That's not a side effect of the tension here. It's the point. Iran doesn't need to sink a ship to win economically. It just needs to make the Gulf feel dangerous enough that shipping costs go up and Western allies start asking whether the blockade is worth it. The nuclear talks context matters too. Iran has been under mounting economic pressure, and historically, when diplomacy stalls, the IRGC Navy's operational tempo goes up. This engagement fits a pattern of military signaling tied to political negotiation, a way of saying, the cost of pressure is not zero. Here's my read. The next confrontation is already being planned. Not necessarily here, not necessarily by the same unit. But the IRGC will study this engagement, identify the gaps, and try again. The question isn't whether, it's what they adjust. Here's what happened. The IRGC ran a sophisticated, premeditated swarm attack against a U.S. destroyer. They baited a boarding team into the water, waited 6 days for the right moment, and executed a doctrine that should have split the ship's defenses across 3 vectors. It failed because of one sensor operator's instinct and one captain's ability to solve a geometry problem under fire. The next confrontation is already forming, and based on what I'm seeing in IRGC operational patterns right now, the stakes are significantly higher. That's the next briefing. Subscribe and hit the bell if you want that one when it drops. And drop a comment. What would you have done with that portside Mark 38? Because there wasn't a clean answer, and I want to know what you think.